Welcome back to the podcast. This is episode 3, and today we're going to take an in-depth view into one of the most iconic tanks of the Second World War, and that is the Tiger I. So we're going to look at where it came from, its development history, how it sort of comes out of the late 1930s with this new idea of tank warfare, and then we'll go on through until it actually becomes the Tiger. And then we'll talk about the variants and the production, its combat history, and then finally link all of that back to scale modelling and explain why it remains one of the most popular subjects in our hobby. Nearly every company has a Tiger, and a lot of people have built or bought a model of one. So without further ado, let's get into segment 1, and that's the origins and the prehistory of the Tiger. So the story of the Tiger actually begins before the tank actually has a name, and before we actually get into what those prototypes were, it's worth just taking a moment just to explain some of the terminology. So early on we're going to be talking about DWs, so DW1 and DW2, and these are the Durchbruchswagen. Apology for a lot of this pronunciation, you'll be pleased to know it all gets knocked back to abbreviations quite quickly. So we've got Durchbruchswagen, which is the German meaning for a breakthrough vehicle, and this is shortened to DW. This is introduced in 1937, so this is an idea of breakthrough tank, or having a tank available to the actual tank arm of the armoured forces to be able to push through heavily fortified lines. So that's the new concept that's come out of this. It's a breakthrough tank, and that's the key component for how the Tiger comes about based on that. Now, DW is a couple of the earliest prototypes, and we'll get into them in more detail in a second, but it's just so you know the terminology. That changes to an abbreviation of VK, which is short for Werkskonstruktion, and this means experimental design, really, in layman's terms. So that starts being changed in 1939, and the terms DW and VK run together for a little bit, and then it changes into VK. I just want to make you aware of that. This is the beginning of quite a complex history in what the development of the Tiger later becomes. So let's get into these early prototypes. So this is the DW1 and DW2. So the initial work on these was carried out by Henschel. They developed two chassis that were slightly different, the DW1 and the DW2. These were constructed from soft steel for testing purposes. They featured 50mm of frontal armour, and that was quite significant at the time. Bear in mind, again, this is 1937. So that's when this is all starting. Their purpose was to trial a number of components, including these new forms of engine, starting with the Maybach HL120. And these had been under development since 1935. There'd been an ongoing debate within the German military about the need for a high-performance power plant, especially if they needed to support these heavier tanks. They're going to need bigger engines. So this marked one of the first real steps towards that goal, was the development of this Maybach HL120 engine. Alongside this, Krupp was awarded the contract to design the turret, and they were initially armed with the short-barreled 7.5cm KWK 37 L24 gun, which is also what you would see in, say, a Panzer IV-D, for instance. So it's a short-barreled, it's an infantry support weapon, really. It's not an anti-tank gun as such. One or more prototypes of these turrets were reportedly demonstrated to senior military officials and political leaders around mid-1939, and there are a couple of photos of these early prototypes, DW1 and DW2. One is quite well known, and it's got a dummy turret on it, just some weight on it, so it can give the example of how it performs with the weight of a turret on the hull. Now, that runs in to VK 30.01 and VK 36.01. These start entering the heavyweight class. We'll try and explain all of this now, and hopefully you'll stay with me, and it's not too confusing. It is very convoluted, I'm not going to lie with that. So the DW series transitions into the VK program. So DW is now gone. They're running alongside for the initial bit of VK 30.01, but that's what we'll concentrate on now. So we've got VK 30.01, and this is the first real attempt at a heavy tank prototype. Multiple hulls were produced. The attempts to upgrade the armament to a longer 75mm gun was actually unsuccessful, and this was due to limitations in the turret ring and structural issues. Now, interestingly, these surplus turrets, they didn't go to waste. They were later installed into fixed fortifications on the Atlantic War. It's quite famous photos of them as well as the Allies start to come in through Normandy. We do see pictures of these prototype turrets. So these were still being produced by Krupp, and they were trying to be upgunned for this VK 30.01 class. Now, this 30.01 was unable to meet the changing requirements that the battlefield needed, so after quite a long period, this series was dropped. Now all the force goes into the new version, which is VK 36.01. Now this design starts to come in around mid-1940, and this tank was larger, more ambitious as well, and it was planned to carry a 10.5 centimetre gun. So everything's going up, and the weight is starting to go up towards 40 tonnes as well. So we're getting bigger, we've got bigger guns, bigger tank, bigger weight, everything's starting to get bigger, bigger, bigger. And this design starts to incorporate features that we would later see and would become synonymous with the Tiger. Interleaved road wheels, the lack of return rollers, meaning that instead of having small wheels along the top of the main set of wheels to let the track sag, the track just goes around the sprocket and back onto the road wheels, which is a classic feature of the Tiger. We get wider tracks as well, the boxy silhouette is starting to come on, and we're getting very thick frontal armour at this point now, and it represents a clear step towards the modern heavy tank concept of the time, that is. And by 1941, Hitler starts to become personally involved with the development process, as he did with many German weapon programs. Once he starts involving himself with all of these different programs, including the Tiger program, it starts to bring momentum, but also complication. The gun was downgraded from a 10.5 centimetre to a 7.5 centimetre, and changes to the turret design and armour thickness were repeatedly ordered through a short period. These constant modifications actually delayed the project, and they also create competing design directions, some of which would be inherited in the final Tiger specification as well. We'd see some of these problems that end up in it. Now, the final years of the VK line, so the VK 3601 ultimately stalls in favour of a newer, more promising project. Although it did show significant potential, the tank's increasing complexity with the shifting design requirements and overlapping priorities with other heavy tank programs actually leads to its quiet cancellation. Nonetheless, the chassis did undergo extensive testing, and there are famous wartime photographs, one of even having Albert Speer riding atop the prototype during the trials, and that's an indication of how seriously the project was being taken at the time. But by the end of the war, there were some unfinished VK 3601 turrets. They were still stored at the Krupp Steelworks. Now these, as before, were intended to be converted into fixed fortifications, similar to the ones used on the Atlantic War. But however, with Germany's rapid collapse in 1945, these plans never came to fruition. Now there's an interesting little post-war footnote here for the VK 3601 or 3601, and this is why I bring it in here, and it adds to the convoluted story I'm trying to tell. It's actually been brought back into public imagination, and that's thanks to its inclusion in the computer game World of Tanks, and it appears here as a tier 6 heavy tank. It's also been made available, probably because of that, to modelers in 1/35 scale, and there's a well-detailed plastic kit. This was first released by Revoises and then later by Ryefield Model. So that keeps the legacy of this little-known prototype alive, and that's both through gaming and through modelling. So it's an important piece of the story that wants to be told. Ultimately, it doesn't end up anywhere, but it's a nice looking little tank, that's for sure. Now, the next section then, let's just briefly talk about Hitler's involvement and how that pushes us again in a different direction, and we start to see the 88mm gun coming in. So as the war progressed, German forces start encountering heavier tanks, so the Soviet tanks like the KV-1, and it's very difficult for them to knock these out with the guns that they've got. This is at this time as well. This is early in 1941-42, so it's very difficult for them to be able to knock out some of these heavier Soviet tanks, KV-1 especially, T-34 in some cases. So it becomes clear that the Wehrmacht need more powerful anti-tank weaponry. So Hitler personally intervenes in the tank design process and pushes for the adoption of the 8.8 centimetre, widely known as the 88mm, and that's the KWK-36, and that's the L56 version of that gun. And that's adapted from the already legendary Flak 88. Now, this decision does have major implications due to the size of the recoil that the gun required. It does need a much larger turret than what was being discussed previously when they were looking at the 7.5 centimetre. And it also then needs a more robust chassis to support it. And this significantly alters the direction of the heavy tank programme. And this is when we start seeing the problems that we know: too big, too much engineering, and too many problems. So that's where this is beginning to come in now. Not that putting the 88mm gun into a tank is a problem, but the way it's done starts to create, if it was designed from the start with the 88mm in mind, we'd have a very different end result. So at the same time, multiple manufacturers are bidding for the contract to produce this new heavy tank, and this again creates additional delays and design complications because we've got competing prototypes developed in parallel with each other. So that goes on to the next very famous and well-known part of the Tiger story, which is an actual design contest starting to develop, and this is between Porsche and Henschel. So running us alongside everything that's been done here, all these developments, Ferdinand Porsche enters into the heavy tank arena. Now, it's worth noting that Porsche here, this Ferdinand Porsche, this is the same company known today for its sports cars, so it is Porsche, and they begin developing both heavy and super heavy tank designs around this period. Now, due to internal limitations in producing reliable mechanical transmissions, the actual company Porsche, they opt for this petrol electric drive system. And this is where a gasoline engine powers generators, and then that supplies electricity to the motors that are connected to the transmission. And it is as complicated as it sounds, especially for the time. Maybe revolutionary, but complicated. So the first prototype is known as Type 100, or TYP. So it's Type 100. And this explores the concept of this gasoline engined generator. Now, Krupp is also at this time offered to design a turret, and that's capable of mounting the 8.8 centimetre gun, and that's intended to be fitted to Porsche's chassis. So that's where we are here at this point, which is early 1941. Then there's a meeting with Hitler in May 1941 where development is then accelerated into what becomes the Type 101, and this features several key upgrades, including wider tracks. There's the removal again of those return rollers, so again we've got the track going back onto the same road wheels, and there's a number of design elements as well that would appear later on the Tiger 1P, which is what the Porsche Tiger becomes known as. June 1941, Krupp is awarded a contract to produce 100 of these hulls, and these hulls are designated VK4501P, P being for Porsche. And then along with that, there's an order for 100 matching turrets. And the final assembly is planned for Nibelungenwerk, to be, and that's where they're going to be assembled there. Now, serious technical problems, including overheating, drivetrain failures, and inefficient steering plagues the project, and they only managed to actually get one fully assembled Tiger P in time for Hitler's birthday in April 1942. By November 1942, Hitler cancels the Porsche Tiger project, and to avoid wasting the already produced hulls and parts, he orders that 90 of the chassis, so 90 of these Porsche chassis that are considerably different to the Tiger that ends up being well known, are repurposed to tank destroyers. So they'll be fitted with the higher velocity 8.8 centimetre Pak 43, the L71 gun, and that's a longer barreled gun than what we were talking about earlier. And then these become the well-known Ferdinand, which is first deployed in the Battle of Kursk in 1943. Then whatever they're able to salvage from that battle is then upgraded into the Elephant, and that has improved armour and a hull-mounted machine gun, as well as Zimmer added and a few other little bits and bobs. Now, the remaining 90 turret from the Porsche programme were actually then fitted to the VK4501H, being produced by Henschel, and these are the hulls being produced by Henschel. So this now would become the production version of the Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tiger 1 Aufs E. Now, that single completed Tiger P, so the Porsche Tiger that was actually created for Hitler's birthday, that hangs about a little bit until it's actually converted into a command tank, and then that sees service on the Eastern Front in 1944. So that brings an end to the Porsche saga. We know where the 90 turrets have gone. They've now been taken on by the Henschel hull, which now is awarded the contract, and it carries on with production through there. And this tank looks like the Tiger that we all know in popular culture. During all of this, Henschel had been developing a more conventional prototype, and this is called the VK4501H. This design incorporates a number of key features from the earlier, as far back as the VK3601 project. and most notably it's the interleaved road wheels, which help distribute the vehicle's massive weight more effectively, and it was also compatible with the Krupp turrets originally produced for Porsche's Tiger 1P. So this new Henschel version is being developed with the knowledge that these turrets already exist, so they can design the hull around taking that turret. The Henschel Tiger is then powered by Maybach's new HL210 P45 engine, which is a 21-litre V12 delivering 650 horsepower. Later models would then be upgraded to the more powerful and then reliable version, which is the HL230 P45. The final design was topped with Krupp's standardised turret, and this is armed with a formidable 8.8cm KWK 36 L56 gun, which is a slightly less longer and lower velocity version that ends up in the Ferdinand and the Elephant. And this gives the Tiger its legendary long-range killing power, and the combination of heavy armour, high firepower and psychological shock is what makes this one of the most feared tanks of the war at this point. And as a result, the Henschel Tiger enters full production and becomes the Tiger 1 we know, while Porsche's hulls lived on only in the form of the Ferdinand and Elephant, apart from that one version that sees deployment in the Eastern Front. Now, if you're still with me, that's the extremely convoluted way that the Tiger ends up on the battlefield. Now, we'll go into a little bit more less intense, more interesting section now, where we talk about production numbers and combat history, and then we'll get into the modelling side as well. So the production numbers and deployment data is as follows. So between August 1942 and August 1944, a total of 1,347 Tiger 1 tanks are produced by Henschel. Production is centralised at the Henschel factory in Kassel, with Krupp supplying the turrets. Now, peak output occurs around mid-1943, with roughly 90 to 100 tanks being produced each month. But by late 1943 and into 1944, production does begin to taper off, and it's being hampered by the Allied bombing campaigns. Alongside this, there's logistical bottlenecks, growing material shortages, and that's across the entire German war economy. Now, if we go on to the combat history, we're just dipping our toes in to this. Tiger is a very well-loved, impassioned subject. It's well known by a lot of people as well. I'm sure I've already got a few things wrong here. We may get a few things wrong going forward, but this is the best of my reference that I've got here. So we'll just dip into some of this combat history as we go on through. And this is just highlighting some key important moments that the Tiger appears at. So first off, it's the Eastern Front. This is where the Tiger has its combat debut. The deployment is with Schweier Panzer Abteilung 502, and this is near Leningrad in September 1942. Now, the swampy terrain, combined with the Tiger's weight and its early reliability issues, means that the initial results of this deployment are somewhat underwhelming. Mechanical failures are common, and the tank's full potential isn't actually realised at this point. Critically, one Tiger is actually captured intact by the Soviets at this first battle in January 1943. Which is a significant intelligence loss for the Germans. Now, going on through into July 1943, by the time of Operation Citadel, which is the Battle of Kursk, the Tiger is fielded in larger numbers then, with around 146 Tigers participating, and they do provide formidable firepower and heavy armour, and it does make them highly effective in direct engagements. There's some units do achieve extremely high kill ratios, but the tank's drawbacks, especially mechanical unreliability and also vulnerability to flanking attacks, are still evident at this point, and Kursk highlights both the strengths and the limitations of the Tiger on the Eastern Front. It's interesting to note here as well that it's Kursk where the Ferdinand is first deployed as well. Initially, it looks as though it was extremely poor. Now, they did lose a lot and there were a number of issues, but it's perhaps not as bad as it first seems, the deployment of the Ferdinand. But, they do lose a number of tanks during the Battle of Kursk. After that, it's really tails between the legs all the way back to Germany. Not a lot to discuss there on the Tiger front, really. So then there's North Africa. So Tigers from Panzerabteilung 501, they're deployed to North Africa in late 1942. Now, there's estimates suggest between sort of 20 and 30 Tigers make it to this theatre, maybe a couple more. Initially, there's 20 with this Panzerabteilung. Now, the most famous of these is probably Tiger 131, which is now a restored tank on display at the Tank Museum in Bovington, and it's world renowned through extremely good marketing. Now, this tank was actually captured intact when a 6-pounder anti-tank shell jammed in the turret ring, and you can still see that if you look at Tiger, and there's plenty of videos of this online from the Tank Museum themselves. There's a scrape going underneath the barrel which shows where the shell tracked the barrel and then drove itself down into the turret ring, and it jams it. That immobilised the vehicle. The crew abandoned the tank thinking it was going to blow up, and the next day British forces were able to recover it, examine it, and again, an invaluable intelligence asset. And also the Americans encounter and capture a Tiger as well during the fighting near the Kasserine Pass. So this gives the Western Allies their first real look at the tank's design and capabilities. Now, that tank that the Americans capture, we'll get into this a little bit later, is an earlier version of Tiger 131. It's got some initial features that are kind of unique to the Tunisian front, but it has a longer service. It's captured after 131, so it's got a much longer service life, that one. Now, in Italy, Tigers do see limited deployment in the Italian campaign, and this is mainly with Panzerabteilung 508. The mountainous terrain of Italy and the is ill-suited for the Tiger's size and weight, really, to be honest. The tank is used effectively in certain defensive actions, but its mobility and operational range is severely restricted by the geography and poor road infrastructure. A lot of the deployment in Italy, these tanks have to actually drive themselves there, which is no good at all for a Tiger 1. You don't want to be doing that. You really want the Tiger to be dropped at the place where you want it to have a battle, have its battle, and then taken back. That's how it performs the best. If you've got to actually drive it in, it's no good at all like that. Again, it's these complications from the development. Normandy and the Western Front. So by the time the Normandy invasion begins, which is June 1944, there were Tigers deployed with several units, and probably most notably is Panzerabteilung 101, which is an SS group. Now, the Tiger does play a significant role here in resisting the Allied breakout from the beaches, and one of the most famous actions is known as the action at Villers-Bocage, which is Michael Whitman, who's one of the war's most renowned tank commanders, ambushes a British column and thus destroys multiple tanks and vehicles in a single engagement. And the action does then cement the Tiger's fearsome reputation in the West. This is when you start to hear Allied tank crews, every tank they see is a Tiger. I mean, that can't be the case because there's not enough Tigers there, but it starts to get that myth coming on there. Despite all of this and its battlefield effectiveness, where it was actually very useful, especially in Whitman's destroying that British tank column, it can't really overcome the growing dominance of Allied air power, numerical superiority, and logistical attrition. It really is, you don't win a war by having the best tank, you win a war by having the most tanks. That's what World War II really teaches us in a nutshell, I guess. Now, there's a final use in 1945, and Tigers do remain in use all the way up to the final months of the war, and including a famous example that's even there during the defence of Berlin, albeit it's probably just rolled out of a training centre, is no more than a glorified pillbox, but it is there, and it's captured by the Soviets. But by this point, many had been lost, not just in combat, but is many to mechanical failure and lack of fuel and spare parts, as well as airstrikes. It's worth mentioning here that there is a famous group of unusual Tigers that are deployed in April 1945, and these are used to try and hold back the Allies under Group Fairman, and these are notable for being cobbled together, utilising spare parts. And they're often seen with early turrets, steel road wheels. They can have either type of tracks, and there's usually a mishmash of early and late features, with some having Zimmerit applied maybe to the turret or to the hull or to both or not at all. But later in the war, the Tiger 1 is becoming increasingly replaced by the more powerful Tiger 2, which is the King Tiger. And although both saw action in the chaotic final battles of 1945, by the war's end, very few Tiger 1 tanks remained operational, if at all. Now, I think next we'll just have a note on some of the famous Tiger commanders. So we have to mention Michael Whitman. He's probably the most legendary Tiger commander. He's credited with dozens of tank kills. His most famous action, as we discussed before, is what takes place at Villers-Bocage in 1944, ambushing and destroying a British tank column. Now, modern historians have re-evaluated his impact a little bit, and they do suggest his legacy is perhaps inflated a little bit by wartime propaganda, but he was extremely well known at the time and post-war. But it is worth noting he was an extremely dedicated Nazi. Have a look at his wedding, if nothing else. So he might not be the best poster boy for modern modelling of the Tiger I tank, but he's notable nonetheless. Another one is probably a little bit easier to take is Otto Carias, and he's the author of Tigers in the Mud. He commanded a number of Tiger tanks on the Eastern Front, and his memoir, which is Tigers in the Mud, does remain one of the most respected first-hand accounts of Tiger operations. It does offer an insight into both the vehicle and the brutal reality of armoured warfare. He does have a cleaner reputation than that of Whitman, and for me personally, it's a more interesting story. Now, these commanders in particular lived on through model releases from Tamiya, Dragon, and now even TACOM and Riffield model in 1/35th scale. And this furthers that link between history and modelling, which I like to promote with this podcast, with many digging deeper into the people behind the model and whether or not there is myth and hidden darkness to these key figures. It's an important point. When I was growing up, I didn't know anything about Michael Whitman. I think, I build a Michael Whitman Tiger. Now I'm a little bit older and I've got an idea of what was going on at the time. I tend to shy away a little bit. The whole Whitman praise, I don't like to jump on that bandwagon myself. That's something I've learned through the modelling and trying to sort of dig a bit deeper into the reality behind some of these models. Now, these commanders play a key role in building the Tiger's mythos as a super tank, but the truth often is a little bit more nuanced than that. So it's worth just bearing that in mind. Now, let's have a look at myth versus reality. So the myth: the Tiger was an unstoppable battlefield monster. Now, the reality behind that is, in skilled hands and ideal conditions, the Tiger was devastating, but it does come with major drawbacks. So it suffers frequent mechanical issues. I can't stress that enough. It really is a real pain. It needs to be serviced often. And this is usually in moments of war where that is not something you want to be doing. It has extremely high fuel consumption, which is not great for an army that is fighting more or less the entire war with hardly any fuel to go round. The complex maintenance requirements, as I'm saying, for field fixes, it's just almost impossible. It's an extremely interesting piece of engineering, but you'd probably rather go to war on a Sherman or a T-34, put it like that. Now, in active combat units, operational readiness is often drops below 50%. I read a bit in researching this with the tanks in Italy. Over 50% of them are lost just through breakdowns, just by having to drive themselves to the battlefield. So that's what I'm saying. More that can be avoided, the better the tank is performing. Now, a number of tanks are lost in direct combat, tank to tank, but a lot more are actually lost through air attacks, mechanical breakdowns, and being flanked. So its fearsome reputation is earned, but it's far from invulnerable. Now, if we just dig a little bit deeper on the Allied captures and the evaluation, because I think this is a very important key point as well for the Allied development of tanks. All got them as soon as they encountered them, to be honest. Now, the Soviet Union, they capture a Tiger from its first combat engagement. This is January 1943 with the turret number 100. So this is lost in boggy ground by the, I think it's Panzerabteilung 502. The Soviets drag it out, and it's on display at the Moscow display that's happening quite soon after that. Now, later on, it's still, I believe, displayed at Kubinka Tank Museum in Russia. Now, the United States recover an example. This is in Tunisia, 1943, and this is an early or initial version with the more desertized features, and we'll get into that a little bit in the next section. This Tiger is probably, as well as the one that the Soviet Union captures, is one of the most unique versions to be captured, and it's got a lot of unique features that are specific to the North African front. Great Britain also captures Tiger 131, as we've talked about, in 1943, and this is thoroughly tested, and it remains to this day the only running Tiger 1 in existence. It's restored and displayed at the Tank Museum in Bovington in southwest England, and this is much more in line with early production features. The other two you could kind of describe as initials. This one that is at Bovington is a proper early, as I would like to call it. So these captures allow Allied engineers to debunk the myths quite quickly and adjust tactics and priorities accordingly, and very early on in the war as well. Now let's just have a little chat about the Tiger variants and changes. So this is how I break it down. This is how it is broken down, but there's debate on whether initial production actually exists as a proper term. But if I just run through some of the points that sets these Tigers apart from each other. So initial production begins in 1942. Now these early tanks, some of the first tanks have mirrored tracks. So this means there's a different set for each side. So you've got a right side and a left side. They're handed tracks, which obviously means you need a whole nother tooling and you need twice as many tracks. It's a silly way to go and it's quickly dropped, but they are fielded with sided tracks. Also, and these are ways you can spot this in photos as well. So there's also two shorter sections towards the front of the side fenders. So they're not equal lengths. The first two side fenders on these initials are shorter than the two behind them. They've usually got unique or multiple turret bins as well, and some of these are repurposed from Panzer III. So in the case of the Soviet captured Tiger 100, that's got two turret bins on the side of the turret, which is very odd. You only really see it once or twice. A lot of the other initials repurpose these Panzer III bins, and then later on they're standardised and fitted to the tank when they're delivered, but initially they're delivered without a lot of these parts fitted to them. With that, these initials are often fielded without any side fenders, without any exhaust shrouds, no turret bins, not even tools or tow cables. They come with very few features. It's just the tank that's dropped. And then the ones that are over in North Africa, so that first 20 that are delivered, I class them as kind of desertised. They're Tigers that feature unique and regional modifications. So this can be rounded edges to the front and rear fenders. They've got slatted vents on the exhaust shrouds. They sometimes have their lights fitted to the front plate rather than up on the whole roof. There's a number of other changes, as well as where the shovel is stowed on the front plate of the tank. So all of that really gives you an idea of what initial productions look like. Then we go on to the early production. So this is late 1942 running into early 1943. Now these standardise the early tracks, so that's all one side and they're flipped from side to side, so you all have the same track and you just turn them over to go to the next side. These early tracks, as I call them, have got cleats with no chevrons or anything on them. They're just plain flat cleats. They have standardized side fenders, so they're all the same length. They're all equal size. There's also minor mechanical tweaks for improved reliability coming out of the initials, and there can also be adjustments to the air filter layouts as well, and turret details with two types of air filter housing, slight differences there, and a few differences start to come in with the gun mantlets as well. Then we go on to the mid and the late production. So these start to come in 1943 to 1944. So various things are trialled and then dropped through the mid phase. So this is a gun travel lot. There's multiple different mantlets with reinforcing strips or different periscope openings. Start to get spare track hangers on the turret sides as well. Zimmerit is added, and this is an anti-magnetic paste, and it's put all over the flat exposed surfaces. And then they engrave ridges into it, which helps stop magnetic mines being placed on the tank. This sometimes has a wide pattern on the turret, so quite a crude wide pattern, and then on the hull it can be narrow. But you can also get narrow on the turret as well, it depends whether having the Zimmerit applied. And an interesting point here is often the only people using magnetic mines to knock out tanks was the Germans, so they're protecting themselves from themselves. There's a new track design comes in, and that has raised ridges on top of the cleats, and that's notable. So especially from the modelling point of view, you need to think about there's there's three types of tracks for the Tiger. You've got mirrored, early, and then mid and late. And the mids and lates have the same tracks, and that's the ones with these ridges. There's a new commander's cupola design that comes in from the drum style that you've got on the early. This becomes a lot more lower profile and is similar to what you see on the rest of the tanks. King Tiger, Panther, that sort of thing, with multiple periscopes around. There's removal of features like the turret smoke dischargers. There's also anti-personnel launchers around the whole top as well. They're taken off. And then when you get to the late production, so past mid, then steel rimmed road wheels are introduced to try and cut down on rubber. Now, if you survived all of that and you're a scale modeler, let's get into how we would go about modelling the tiger. So it remains one of the favourites among scale modelers, and that is thanks to its variety of fittings and its iconic profile as well, and its legendary status. There's kits that I'd recommend in 1/35th, and they are as follows. So Tamiya, they produce the early, mid and late, and there is actually a Tunisia version floating about, although I don't think it's in production anymore, but they did kit it. Now, these are solid for beginners, and especially those that are not worried about accuracy. If you would like a little bit more detail, then you could start looking at Takom. Now, they've just released an early. They've also got their mid and lates. Now, they've got very high detail, very good accuracy. They're a great price, and you get a full package. In there, you get a metal barrel, you get grills for the engine, a little bit of photo etch, you get copper cables for the towing cables, and you actually get accurate individual link and length. Well, so you get link and length tracks with the correct open guide horns. Now, there's Ryfield model, RFM, so they've got all variants available, and they've got a lot of these initials as well, and a lot of these one-offs that they do, and they even do the prototype that I'd never mentioned here, but it's got extra armour that drops down over the tracks. So if you want to do any variant of Tiger 1, you can produce any version from Ryfield model. So they've got excellent interior detail as well. They've done some kits with full interiors and very good workable tracks that again are accurate, if not a little bit tricky. The Takom tracks can be tricky as well if you're a beginner, but they are the Ryfield model's kit is a little bit older than the Takom one. It's starting to show its age in my opinion, so it's lacking a bit of detail here and there. And then there's Dragon, which are historically, modelling wise, they are the best models, but now they are quite hard to find. They were initially released around 2005. They've got very high prices these days, certainly from someone in the point of view of the UK, which I am. And a lot of the additional parts that they were first packaged with, they used to come with metal parts, barrels, all sorts of things. That's now being removed in later boxings. And also the tracks, although being individual link magic tracks, they are actually inaccurate because they've got solid guide horns, and the real Tiger has open hole in the guide horns, so they have open guide horns. There's many other manufacturers that have Tigers as well in this scale, and they all have pros and cons, and they're also available in many scales. Tamiya has a whole range in 1/48th. There's plenty in 1/72nd as well, so you'll have to do a little bit more research, especially on scale mates, look at reviews, see what the actual box contents are, to have a look at a few more, but they're the ones that I recommend. Now, if you do want to take one of these kits and enhance it, then the first place you can look is the tracks, because Tiger tracks, like I've said, do have an open guide horn, and often in kits these are supplied as solid guide horns, so that's an inaccuracy. But there's also metal or resin aftermarket tracks that can be made to work, so they're workable. You connect them with a pin or a piece of wire, and then these are a great addition because they give you the correct track sag and better detail. And like we've been saying through with the way that the return rollers are taken out, having that track sag is an iconic feature of the Tiger 1, and that's a good way to get it in your kit. Also, there's engine grills, so there were mesh grills put over the actual air intake grills at the back of the tank. Now, these are often extras in some kits, especially the older kits. So Tamiya doesn't come with any of this. You just get the plastic kit, rubber tracks for the early, and you get individual link tracks with solid guide horns for the mid and late. Now, photo etch is the way to go here, and upgrades are available. Tamiya do their own, as well as Eduard and Aber. There's plenty that you can get hold of to put on. And another key feature is a turned metal barrel as well, which is a solid upgrade. So putting that on your kit is a good way to really lift it. There's plenty of weathering options as well, so think about the theatres. If you're looking at Kursk, you've got dusty mud, more dust than mud, I guess. You've got nice camouflage options, and there's many other options as well for the Russian front, as well as having winter camouflage as well, so whitewash. There's a huge amount of options on the Eastern Front. Now, North Africa is pale dust layers, obviously. You can have sun-faded markings, or a lot of them were often overpainted as well. There's multiple markings on some turrets, and there's differences as well. You get some with very small numbering, some with huge numbering on the turrets. So again, pick your version that you want to do. And there is a quite tricky low contrast camouflage that you can do for the African ones as well, which is quite difficult to pull off. Italy, you got rain streaking and wear from the mountainous and muddy terrain, so there's a lot of options there, especially if you like building bases up or dioramas. That mountainous terrain leads to that perfectly. Then in Normandy, we've got a three-tone camouflage that starts to come in on the lates. Usually most of the tigers there are steel wheels as well, and they're often seen carrying fuel drums and jerry cans, and they do often have vegetation as well because they're trying to avoid those air attacks. You can even model the famous Tiger 131 directly if you want, with several kits and plenty of reference photos out there as well, available online and from Bovington, and I think Dragon even released a 131 kit. Now, that's the first historical deep dive into a subject on this podcast, so I hope that's enjoyable, and I hope it hasn't been too much and I didn't lose you at the start. This really wraps up now our dive into the Tiger 1, and that covers us from the VK series or origins all the way to the battlefield development and then into scale modelling. So next episode we're going to be talking about an actual scale modelling subject, so we're going to go right back fully into scale modelling, and there isn't much opportunity there for the history, I don't think. So that'll be released in episode 4, so stay tuned for that. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know your thoughts down below, and as always, thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next one.